Pennsylvania, August 25, 2014. Weather, 73 degree. Do you feel it? It's as if the trees have ears, as if the very air is waiting for something. Some sign that the calm is just an illusion. The forest has its secrets, and today, one of them has decided to emerge. It all began months ago when I received a phone call from an old friend, Jeff. He sounded troubled, his voice filled with an unusual anxiety. He was a cryptid hunter, the kind who doesn't believe in limits. For Jeff, the line between adrenaline and panic never existed. He lived on the edge. "You need to come," he insisted, his voice trembling at the end of the line. "I found something big." I drove nonstop to Jeff's cabin, deep in the heart of the Pennsylvania forest. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the temperature slowly dropped to 73 degrees. It was one of those late afternoons that would seem peaceful to anyone, except for those who know the loaded silence of nature. Upon arrival, the cabin was dark, the smell of wood smoke in the air. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. When I entered, I found the house empty, except for a small crackling fireplace. However, what really caught my attention was the coffee table. It was covered with maps, black and white photographs, and Jeff's diary, open to the last page. August 20th, 2014. The hunt has begun. They say it's just a legend, but I saw it with my own eyes. The marks on the trees, the bones. They're not from an ordinary animal. I know I'm close, maybe too close. Something was wrong, very wrong. In the corner of the cabin, hanging on a rusty hook, was Jeff's old rifle. That was unusual. He never left without it. I decided to follow the trail left in the diary, hoping to find him, maybe injured, maybe worse. I took the rifle and a machete from the cabin and plunged into the forest. The path was blackened, as if something had passed through, crushing everything in its way. A trail of crushed bones and broken branches led me to a clearing. And then, the smell hit me, that putrid stench of rotting flesh, of something that shouldn't exist. When I entered the clearing, what I saw made my blood run cold. A circle of ancient stones surrounded Jeff's mutilated body. His eyes, still open, were frozen in a look of pure terror. Symbols were carved into his flesh, deep marks made with something sharper than any knife. And beside him, a creature that should not exist in this world. It was large, bigger than any bear I'd ever seen, with long, sharp claws, and a mouth full of pointed teeth that glistened in the moonlight. But that wasn't what terrified me the most. It was the way the creature moved, as if its bones were disjointed, as if it were being pulled by invisible strings. It stopped, tilting its head, as if listening to something. The silence was deadly, and then, without warning, it lunged at me. Everything happened so fast I barely had time to react. I ran, but there was nowhere to escape. The forest, which once seemed so familiar, was now a maze of darkness and fear. The branches scratched my face, the roots tried to trip me as if the very forest were trying to prevent my escape. But I kept running, driven by pure survival instinct. Finally, I found shelter in a small dark cave. The sound of the creature following me echoed through the corridors, its claws scraping the stones, its heavy breathing mingling with mine. I knew I couldn't keep running forever. I had to fight. I placed the rifle on the ground, my hands trembling as I reloaded the bullets. Memories of my grandfather came flooding back. He always told me that no matter how terrifying the monster was, the important thing was to never show fear. Monsters can sense fear, he would say. They feed on it. Suddenly, the sound stopped. The silence was deafening. I held my breath, trying to listen, trying to understand where the creature was. Then, I felt something cold and damp on the back of my neck. I turned slowly, my heart pounding uncontrollably in my chest. There it was, just a few feet away from me, its eyes glowing in the darkness. But they weren't normal eyes. They were black, deep, as if they were staring directly into my soul. Its sharp teeth were stained with blood, probably Jeff's blood. I raised the rifle, aiming at the creature. My fingers trembled, but I knew I had no choice. It was now or never. I fired. The sound of the shot echoed through the cave, followed by an ear-piercing scream. The creature staggered back, its skin tearing where the bullet had hit, but it didn't fall. It rose, even more enraged, advancing toward me. Without thinking, I grabbed the machete and charged at it, screaming like a madman. The blade found its flesh, cutting deep, but the creature didn't stop. It attacked me with overwhelming force, throwing me against the cave wall. Everything went blurry. The pain was unbearable, but I couldn't give up. With the last of my strength, I drove the machete into the creature's throat. It shuddered, letting out a low groan before finally collapsing to the ground, dead. For a moment, I lay there, panting, staring at the creature's body. I had won, but at what cost? Jeff was dead, and I didn't know if I would make it out of that cave alive. With great effort, I got up, staggering toward the exit. The sun was beginning to rise, the first light of day bathing the forest in a golden glow. But for me, the light would never be the same again. I knew that wherever I went, whatever I did, that moment would haunt me forever. When I finally returned to the cabin, everything was quiet. The cabin seemed even more empty, more desolate. I sat on the porch, watching the sun slowly rise on the horizon. The adrenaline finally subsided, leaving me with a sense of emptiness, of loss. I picked up Jeff's diary and flipped through the pages, reading his last words again. They say it's just a legend. I closed the diary and looked out at the forest, now bathed in sunlight. I knew I would never be the same again. Something inside me had changed, something I couldn't explain. And then I heard a sound, a soft, almost imperceptible sound coming from deep within the forest. Something that made me shiver to the bone. The sound of footsteps, heavy, dragging, as if something was coming toward me. Something that shouldn't exist. I stood up, rifle in hand, ready to face whatever it was. And that's when I realized the hunt never ends. Pennsylvania, August 26, 2014. Weather, 66 degrees. The sunrise brought a false sense of security. What remained of the night seemed to have been devoured by an abyss of darkness, a void where time dilated and terror became eternal. Jeff's cabin, once a safe haven, now felt like a mausoleum, steeped in the presence of what I had killed in the cave. But like a shadow that refuses to leave even under the brightest light, the feeling of being watched did not abandon me. I sat in the old rocking chair on the porch, trying to calm my breathing, forcing my heart to slow down. But with every creak of the wood beneath my feet, my mind returned to the sound I heard at dawn. Those dragging, almost ghostly footsteps, echoing through the forest like a call from beyond us. Like a call from beyond. I stood up slowly, the rifle firm in my hands. I no longer felt fear. It was as if my soul had been consumed by something much darker. I descended the steps of the porch, my eyes fixed on the tree line ahead. The silence was disturbing, almost unnatural. Every step I took seemed to reverberate through the forest like a muffled scream, and with each passing second, the tension grew. In the air, a strange smell mixed with the morning breeze. It wasn't just the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. It was something metallic, pungent, vaguely reminiscent of blood and rust. I followed it, guided like a puppet, my legs moving on their own while my mind was trapped in a cycle of fear and morbid fascination. Then I saw it. At the edge of the forest, where the sunlight penetrated only as thin, fragmented rays, stood the creature. Not the one I had killed in the cave, but another, larger, more horrific. Its body rose from the ground, twisted as if made of solid shadows, and its skin, covered in thick blackened fur, seemed to pulse to the rhythm of a perverse heartbeat. But what truly terrified me was its face, or the lack of one. Where its head should have been, there was only a dark void, like a black hole in the shape of a skull, sucking in the light around it. And then, from the void, came those eyes, 6 of them, scattered randomly across what should have been its face. They were not ordinary eyes, but black orbs, shiny like polished obsidian, fixed on me with cold, predatory intelligence. My legs weakened, and for a moment the world around me spun. I knew, deep inside, that this creature was different, older, and infinitely more dangerous than anything I could imagine. It wasn't just a beast. It was a nightmare incarnate, something that defied the laws of nature and sanity. The monster began to move, one dragging step at a time, as if savoring my reaction, absorbing every drop of fear I exuded. I tried to raise the rifle, but my arms were stiff, as if they were made of stone. Each second stretched into an endless torment as the creature drew closer. Suddenly, something shifted in the corner of my eye. A glimmer, a reflection in the sunlight. Without thinking, I turned my body, pointing the rifle at what appeared to be a hooded figure, hidden in the shadows of the trees. Before I could react, the figure spoke in a raspy whisper, almost a groan. "Run, before it's too late." The figure turned and disappeared into the trees like a ghost, but not before tossing something toward me, a small glass vial, filled with an unknown liquid. I looked at the vial in my hands, perplexed, but there was no time for questions. The creature, now only a few feet away, let out a guttural roar that shook my chest and shattered my nerve. The sound was like that of 1,000 souls in agony, as if each one were trapped in that monstrous body, crying out for release. That's when I understood. This creature wasn't just a physical being. It was a conglomeration of pain, fear, and despair, something that fed on those emotions to gain strength. And I was its next meal. The vial in my hand seemed to burn, as if it was waiting to be used. With no other choice, I uncorked it and threw the liquid in the creature's direction. The effect was immediate. The liquid evaporated in the air, transforming into a dense cloud of silver smoke that enveloped the creature, causing it to recoil with an ear-splitting roar. The black orbs of its eyes began to glow with an even deeper hatred, as its body trembled as if it were about to explode. Without thinking twice, I took advantage of the distraction and ran. I ran like never before, the branches and leaves whipping against my face, the sound of the creature still echoing behind me, though more distant now. My heart was pounding so fast I could hardly breathe. But I couldn't stop, couldn't look back. When I finally emerged from the forest, I nearly stumbled onto an old dirt road. My body was exhausted, my lungs burning, but I kept running until Jeff's cabin was completely out of sight, until I was back in civilization, where the sun shone over the hills and the world seemed normal again. But I knew that nothing would ever be normal again. I had seen something that should never have been seen, something that defied reality itself. And as the lights of the city appeared on the horizon, a dark thought formed in my mind. The vial was only a temporary protection. The creature was still out there, still hunting me, and I knew that no matter where I went, it would always find me. For now, I had escaped, but that ancient hungry thing was just beginning its hunt. And deep down, I knew that sooner or later, it would come for me. Pennsylvania, August 28, 2014. Weather, 59 degrees. 2 days had passed since I fled that forest, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Even in the city, surrounded by people and lights, I couldn't shake the impression that something was following me. My dreams were filled with shadows, and those black eyes which seemed to pierce my soul. I woke up every few hours, drenched in cold sweat, the monster's scream still echoing in my mind. The local news didn't mention anything about what happened at Jeff's cabin, but I knew it was only a matter of time before someone found the remains, or until something worse happened. I sat at the kitchen table in my apartment, the curtains drawn, trying to gather my thoughts, trying to figure out what to do next. The empty vial lay in front of me, a constant reminder that the protection it offered was temporary. The hooded figure who had thrown the vial to me had disappeared as quickly as they had appeared, leaving me with more questions than answers. Who was that person? How did they know about the creature? And most importantly, why were they helping me? I thought about going to the police, but how could I explain it? Officer, a shadow monster is hunting me. It was the kind of thing that would send you straight to a psychiatric hospital, not to safety-atric hospital. Besides, part of me knew that this creature wasn't something the authorities could fight. It was ancient, beyond human comprehension. Something that belonged to a world of nightmares, not ours. Then the phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The shrill sound made me jump, almost knocking over the chair. I looked at the screen and saw an unknown number. I hesitated, but something told me I should answer. Hello? My voice came out more trembling than I would have liked. You need to get out of there now. The voice on the other end was urgent, hoarse, but familiar. He's coming for you. Who are you? I asked, fear creeping up my spine. There's no time to explain. Grab what you can and head east to the refuge. It's your only chance of surviving. Refuge? What are you talking about? My mind was spinning, trying to understand what was happening. Follow the old road to the mountains. Keep going until you reach the hidden valley. Look for the stones shaped like an arch. You'll understand when you get there. And remember, trust no one on the way. No one. The line went silent for a moment before the voice spoke again, with a somber gravity. He's closer than you think. Run. The call dropped, leaving me with a growing sense of panic. The silence that followed was almost deafening, and suddenly the small apartment felt tight, claustrophobic. The advice to run was sensible, but to where? And who was this person? The refuge sounded like something out of a fairy tale, but in my current state, I was willing to try anything. I grabbed a backpack and started throwing in what I could. Clothes, some canned food, a flashlight, the rifle, and the machete. My hands shook as I packed everything, trying to ignore the feeling that time was running out. I looked at the empty vial on the table, hesitating before packing it as well. Somehow, it seemed important. With the backpack ready, I left the apartment, locking the door behind me. The street was quiet, with few cars passing and people walking leisurely, unaware of the danger I felt. I got into my truck and started driving, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The old road to the mountains was about an hour away. I used to go there with Jeff, exploring trails and camping under the stars. But now, the place felt distant, almost foreign, as if it had been tainted by the darkness I found in the forest. As I drove, the tall trees began to close in above me, plunging the road into a twilight that seemed to deepen with every mile. My thoughts raced as fast as the road beneath the truck's wheels. Who was the hooded figure? The voice on the phone? They seemed connected somehow, involved in a mystery that was beyond my understanding. But more than anything, I was worried about the creature, that ancient, hungry thing that seemed determined to hunt me down. The words of the person on the phone echoed in my mind. He's closer than you think. The thought made me glance in the rearview mirror, and my heart nearly stopped when I saw a shadow moving between the trees at the edge of the road. It was fast, almost imperceptible, But it was there, following me, getting closer with every second. I pressed the gas pedal, the tires screeching as the truck gained speed. Fear gripped me like a cold hand tightening around my chest. The trees blurred past and the sun began to hide behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the road. Night was coming, and with it, the real terror. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached what seemed to be the beginning of the path to the refuge. The asphalt road turned into a dirt trail, flanked by ancient moss-covered trees. The silence here was different, denser, as if the very air was waiting for something. I remembered the words on the phone. Look for the stones shaped like an arch. I needed to find this place before night fell completely. I continued driving down the trail, now slower, my eyes scanning every detail, desperately searching for the arch of stones mentioned. The sun was fading, and soon darkness enveloped the trail, turning the trees' shadows into threatening shape. The creature, if it was still following me, would be just a few steps away now, hidden in the darkness. Finally, I saw something ahead that made me slam on the brakes. The stones, large, ancient rocks, forming a natural arch at the edge of the trail. They looked like markers of a forgotten entrance to another world. A world where I might find answers, or, at the very least, a moment of peace. I left the truck, grabbing my backpack and rifle. The darkness was so deep that the flashlight seemed to do little more than cut a narrow path through the shadow ahead of me. I passed through the arch of stones, feeling a strange shift in the air. It was colder, heavier, as if I had crossed an invisible borderer. The trail continued, winding through the dense forest until it opened into a hidden valley. A place that seemed to have emerged from an ancient dream or a nightmare. The valley was vast, surrounded by mountains, with a small cabin at its center, on the edge of a dark lake. A faint light flickered in the window, like a candle fluttering in the wind. I hesitated, knowing that the cabin could be both my refuge and my tomb. As I approached, a chill ran down my spine. The cabin door was ajar, creaking slightly as if inviting me inside. I approached cautiously, the rifle ready, and pushed the door open with my foot, trying to peer inside. The interior was simple, almost Spartan, with rustic furniture and an unlit fireplace. The smell of burned wood and fresh herbs filled the air. But what caught my attention the most was a large map hanging on the wall, covered in symbols and annotations in a language I didn't recognize. In the center of the map, a red mark glowed, marking the place where I now stood. Then I heard a movement behind me. I turned quickly, rifle raised, but saw nothing but the darkness that filled the doorway. The silence returned, but my breathing was heavy, fear pulsing in my vein. I turned to leave the cabin, but before I could take another step, a soft, familiar voice stopped me. "Don't be afraid. You're where you're supposed to be." The hooded figure stood there, in the cabin's entrance, its face obscured by the shadow of the hood. It moved slowly, almost floating to the center of the room, as if it were not entirely made of flesh and bone. A strange feeling of recognition grew within me, though I couldn't place where I knew them from. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Someone who has been in your place before. Someone who knows the way," the figure replied, with a tone that mixed sadness and understanding. "What way?" My confusion was palpable, and anger began to rise. I ran, I fled, but that thing is still after me. What does it want from me? Why me? The figure stepped closer, and a pale, thin hand emerged from within the cloak, holding a small, glowing object. It was another vial, similar to the one I already had, but the liquid inside it shone with an intensity that was almost supernatural. "This is the next step. Your only chance of survival, but only you can decide if you're ready for what comes next." The figure extended the vial to me. The weight of the decision hung over me like a storm cloud. Accepting meant delving even deeper into the unknown, facing the creature head-on, and possibly never returning in. Refusing, well, that wasn't an option. Not when death was lurking in every shadow. I took the vial with trembling hands, feeling the energy pulsing through the glass. The hooded figure stepped back, their eyes, the only visible feature on their face, glimmering with a dark wisdom. When the time comes, you will know what to do. But remember, not everything you see is what it seems. The choices you make will determine whether you leave this valley as a man or as something very, very different. With those enigmatic words, the figure began to move away, heading toward the door. I wanted to scream, to ask for more answers, but the words wouldn't come out. When I finally managed to move, I ran to the door, but the figure had already disappeared into the darkness, leaving me alone in the cabin with only the vial in hand and a growing fear in my chest. The night was advancing, and I knew the final battle was approaching. I looked at the vial, the last hope against the creature hunting me, and prepared to face the fate that awaited me in the heart of that cursed valley. The cabin felt alive, breathing with the rhythm of the wind howling through the mountains, and I, alone inside, felt the weight of the vial in my hands, as if it held more than just liquid, as if it contained my destiny. The darkness outside the window seemed to pulse, moving like an entity of its own, a constant threat. The cold was growing, and with it, the premonition that something was about to happen. I knew I couldn't stay here. The hooded figure had given me the vial with a clear warning. The moment was approaching, and I would have to make a choice. But how would I know what to do? And what if I failed? Questions swirled in my mind, but the answers remained out of reach. I decided I couldn't just wait for the creature to find me again. I needed to explore the valley, understand where I was, and find any clues that might help me leave here alive. I grabbed my backpack, placed the vial in a secure pocket, and slung the rifle over my shoulder before stepping out of the cabin, flashlight in hand. The valley seemed to be shrouded in a dense fog, muffling any sound that wasn't my own footsteps. The tall trees, deformed by time and the harsh climate, formed dark silhouettes against the cloudy sky. I walked carefully, my eyes scanning the ground ahead and around me, alert to any movement. Then I saw it, in the distance, an ancient structure, almost hidden by the vegetation. It was a circle of stones, similar to the arch I had passed through, but much larger, like a forgotten sanctuary. As I approached, I could see that the stones were covered in moss and carved with strange symbols, some familiar from those I had seen on the map in the cabin. In the center of the circle, there was a stone pedestal, and on it, an object that glowed faintly, as if emanating its own light. I climbed the steps carefully, feeling the tension increase with each step. When I reached the top, I saw that the object was an ancient medallion, seemingly made of gold, but so worn by time that its inscriptions were almost illegible. I picked up the medallion, and at that very moment, a cold chill ran through my body, as if death itself had touched my soul. The wind blew fiercely, making the trees around me whisper in forgotten tongues. The air became dense, and I felt that something, or someone, was approaching. My intuition screamed at me to leave, but something more powerful kept me rooted in place. And the medallion began to vibrate in my hands, and a soft voice, almost a whisper, penetrated my mind. It wasn't a human voice, but something ancient, ancestral, speaking directly to my soul. You are close, but the sacrifice has yet to be made. I looked around, trying to locate the source of the voice, but there was no one there. Just the wind, the trees, and the fog, which now seemed to close in around me, trapping me in the center of the stone circle. Who's there? My voice sounded shaky, like a distant echo in the vastness of the valley. The voice responded, this time louder, like distant thunder reverberating through my being. You seek answers, but the price will be high. The guardian is not just a hunter, it is the key. And you, the one who dared to cross the portal, must decide if you are ready to face what is to come. The creature, the guardian, it all began to make sense. I was being led to an inevitable confrontation, a battle where not just my life, but something much larger was at stake. The medallion was a piece of this puzzle, and the vial in my pocket, the only weapon I had against the enemy. I don't understand. I began to speak, but the voice cut me off, more severe this time. You will understand, but only when it's too late to turn back. The darkness is coming, and with it, the true test. Suddenly, the medallion stopped vibrating and silence fell over the valley, a silence that seemed to suffocate me, leaving only the sound of my rapidly beating heart. I knew I couldn't stay still. I pocketed the medallion and ran back down the trail that had brought me here. I needed time to think, to understand what had just happened. As I ran, I heard those heavy footsteps behind me again, but now they were closer, more insistent. The creature was lurking, closing in, and I could feel it was about to find me. With no choice, I kept running, my feet stumbling over roots and stones as I struggled to maintain my balance. Night had already fallen completely when I returned to the cabin. I rushed inside, locking the door behind me, panting. The medallion and the vial seemed to weigh heavier in my pockets, as if what they represented was finally crushing me. I approached the unlit fireplace and tried to reignite it, but the cold wind seeping through the window cracks made it difficult. When the flames finally started to crackle, the sound brought a strange sense of comfort, but not for long. I knew the creature was close, and the only thing separating me from it was the old wood of the cabin. I took the medallion out of my pocket and examined it by the firelight. The inscriptions, still difficult to decipher, seemed to change as I stared at them, almost as if they were alive. When I touched it, I felt that cold chill again, but this time, along with it, a wave of clarity washed over me. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, and I knew what needed to be done. The medallion, the vial, and the circle of stones, they were all connected to the guardian, that monstrous creature that was hunting me. If I wanted to survive, I needed to return to the circle and complete the ritual that had begun. But the question was, what did the ritual truly demand? And what would be the cost? As I pondered these questions, a sound cut through the silence of the night. A soft scratching, almost inaudible, but unmistakable. It came from outside the cabin, like claws scraping the wood. My breath caught in my throat. The creature was here. I turned slowly, rifle in hand, and took a few steps toward the door. The sound continued, more insistent now, as if the creature was testing the structure, looking for a weak spot. The tension was unbearable, and every second seemed to stretch into eternity. Without thinking, I flung the door open in one quick motion, pointing the rifle outside. But there was nothing there. The night was still, the moon hidden by thick clouds. But I knew the calm was just an illusion. The creature was near, hiding in the shadows, waiting. With my heart pounding, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to act before it was too late. I ran to the stone circle, the medallion clutched in my hand, and the vial secure in my pocket. The ancient stones, towering against the night sky, seemed to radiate a dark energy, as if they were aware of what was about to happen. In the center of the circle, I knelt and placed the medallion on the stone pedestal. The voice in my mind, now louder and clearer, guided me on what to do. I opened the vial, the bright liquid inside it pulsing with an almost hypnotic light. I knew that what I was about to do would be the point of no return. To seal fate, blood must merge with darkness. the voice whispered, with a mix of authority and lament. Without hesitation, I poured the liquid over the medallion. Immediately, the ground beneath me began to tremble, and a wave of energy coursed through the circle, causing the stones to emit a faint, yet menacing glow. The earth below began to split, as if the very valley was awakening from a deep, deadly sleep. That's when I heard the roar, that unmistakable roar that chilled the soul and heralded the creature's arrival. It was coming, and this time, there was nowhere to run. I stood up, rifle ready, my entire body on alert. The creature emerged from the shadows, its black eyes glowing with a fury and hunger that seemed endless. But there was something different about it now, as if it were being drawn to the circle, compelled by a force beyond its control. It advanced, its movements slow, but loaded with deadly intent. When it crossed the threshold of the stone circle, the inscriptions on the medallion glowed intensely, and an invisible force seemed to envelop the creature, trapping it in the center of the sanctuary. The creature fought against the force that held it, letting out roars of rage that echoed through the mountains. But it was futile. The ritual was working. I could feel the tension in the air, the battle between the ancient magic and the beast being sacrificed. And then, in a moment that seemed eternal, everything fell silent and the creature froze in place, its eyes fixed on me, and a strange understanding flashed in them. It knew its end was near, and that I was responsible for it. "Do it," the voice in my mind commanded. I lifted the rifle, aiming at the creature, but I hesitated. Something inside me resisted, as if a part of me was being consumed by the same power that held it captive. I knew that it wasn't just the creature at stake here, but something much deeper. "Do it now, or it will be the end of everything," the voice urged, stronger, more urgent. With a shout of pure determination, I pulled the trigger. The bullet struck the creature right in the center of its false head, and in an instant, a burst of light and energy enveloped the circle, blinding me completely. When the light faded, everything was quiet again. The stone circle was intact, but the creature had vanished, as if it had never existed. I collapsed to my knees, exhausted, trying to process what had just happened. The medallion, now dull, lay on the pedestal, and the empty vial beside it. I picked them both up, feeling a strange peace wash over me, but also a sense of loss, as if something of me had been taken with the creature. As the fog began to lift, and the first light of dawn appeared on the horizon, I realized that the battle was over, but the cost had been high. I had survived, but I knew that what happened that night would mark me forever. I rose slowly, starting to walk back to the cabin. The mountains in the distance seemed to watch, silent witnesses to what had occurred. The valley, now quiet and peaceful, hid its secrets once more, waiting for the next fool who dared to challenge them. And I, now a changed man, knew I would never be the same. The Guardian had been defeated, but the shadows of its existence would stay with me, whispering in my dreams, reminding me that some nightmares never truly end.